Thank you, Aunt. My Aunt was helping me get set up. Namaste, Nitya.
Okay, bye.
Omkar. So happy all of you are here. And Dennis just arrived. And and Kapil is here too.
Paul is there.
So far, Atma, Nitya, Omkar, and Nikhil. So can you all hear me? Okay, and everything's okay? So I'll just wait a moment to make sure that everything is okay. And it's been actually quite some time since I've read on the Invited channel. I haven't actually read on the Invited channel since I've been here in India. So I'm very happy to start this again. And I'm going to be reading from Sri Ramana Maharshi, Be As You Are. And anyone is welcome to join the hangout. Yes, loud and clear. Very good. Thank you, Atma, for helping me. Okay. So I have the book on my laptop, so I'll be reading from there, and I'll check in periodically. Om Sri Satguru Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Sri Satguru Anantaji Ki Jai. Okay. So I'm very happy to read this book because it's been calling at me for some time, and I'm just going to start from really just the beginning. So I'm going to read the introduction, and then I'm not going to be reading as I go on. I'm not going to be reading every chapter, but I'm going to be reading quite a few of them. Just not every chapter, but I'm going to just start today with reading the introduction. So bear with me because the introduction, some of you may already be very familiar with Ramana Maharshi's story and what brought him to Guru and everything, but I'm just going to start. In 1896, a 16-year-old schoolboy walked out on his family and, driven by an inner compulsion, slowly made his way to Arunachala, a holy mountain and pilgrimage center in South India. On his arrival, he threw away all his money and possessions and abandoned himself to a newly discovered awareness that his real nature was formless, immanent consciousness. His absorption in this awareness was so intense that he was completely oblivious of his body and the world. Insects chewed away portions of his legs. His body wasted away because he was rarely conscious enough to eat, and his hair and fingernails grew to unmanageable lengths. So after 2 or 3 years in this state, he began a slow return to physical normality, a process that was not finally completed for several years. His awareness of himself as consciousness was unaffected by this physical transition, and it remained continuous and undimmed for the rest of his life. In Hindu parlance, he had realized the self. That is to say, he had realized by direct experience that nothing existed apart from an indivisible and universal consciousness, which was experienced in its unmanifest form as beingness or awareness, and in its manifest form as the appearance of the universe. How's my reading pace? Is it okay? Not too fast? Normally, this awareness is only generated after a long and arduous period of spiritual practice, but in this case, it happens spontaneously. without prior effect or desire. I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right. Venkataram, that was his name at the time. The 16-year-old schoolboy was alone in an upstairs room of his uncle's house in Madurai, near the southern tip of India, when suddenly gripped by an intense fear of death. In the following few minutes, he went through a simulated death experience during which he became consciously aware for the first time that his real nature was imperishable and that it was unrelated to the body, the mind, or the personality. Many people have reported similar unexpected experiences, but they are almost invariably temporary. In his case, the experience was permanent and irreversible. From that time on, his consciousness of being an individual person ceased to exist, and it never functioned in him again. He told no one about his experience, and for 6 weeks, he kept up the appearance of being an ordinary schoolboy. However, he found it an increasingly difficult posture to maintain, and at the end of the 6-week period, he abandoned his family and went directly to the holy mountain of Arunachala. The choice of Arunachala was far from random. Throughout his brief life, he had always associated the name of Arunachala with God, and it was a major revelation to him when he discovered that it was not some heavenly realm, but a tangible earthly entity. The mountain itself had long been regarded by Hindus as a manifestation of Shiva, a Hindu god, and in later years, Bhagwan often said it was the spiritual power of Arunachala which had brought about his self-realization. His love for the mountain was so great that from the day he arrived in 1896 until his death in 1950, he could never be persuaded to go more than 2 miles away from its base. Atma says if you could read a bit slower. Yes, of course, dear. So happy you're here, Nithya. Okay, so yeah, of course, I'm happy to read a bit slower. Okay. So after a few years of living on its slopes, his inner awareness began to manifest as an outer spiritual radiance. This radiance attracted a small circle of followers, and although he remained silent for most of the time, he embarked upon a teaching career. One of his earliest followers, impressed by the evident saintliness and wisdom of the young man, decided to rename him Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Bhagavan means Lord or God. Sri is an Indian honorific title. Ramana is a contraction of Venkataraman, which was his schoolboy name, and Maharshi means great seer in Sanskrit. The name found favor with his followers, and it soon became the title by which he became known to the world. At this stage of his life, Sri Ramana was speaking very little, and so his teachings were transmitted in an unusual fashion. Instead of giving out verbal instructions, he constantly emanated a silent force or power, which stilled the minds of those who were attuned to it, and occasionally even gave them a direct experience of the state that he himself was perpetually immersed in. In later years, he became more willing to give out verbal teachings, but even then, the silent teachings were always available to those who were able to make good use of them. Throughout his life, Sri Ramana insisted that the silent flow of power represented his teachings in their most direct and concentrated form. The importance he attached to this is indicated by his frequent statements to the effect that his verbal teachings were only given out to those who were unable to understand the silence. I'm going to read a little more of the introduction, and then I'll go into the first chapter. As the years passed, he became more and more famous. A community grew up around him. Thousands of visitors flocked to see him. And for the last 20 years of his life, he was widely regarded as India's most popular and revered holy man. Some of these thousands were attracted by the peace they felt in his presence. Others by the authoritative way in which he guided spiritual seekers and interpreted religious teachings. And some merely came to tell him their problems. Whatever their reasons for coming, almost everyone who came into contact with him was impressed by his simplicity and his humbleness. He made himself available to visitors 24 hours a day by living and sleeping in a communal hall, which was always accessible to everyone. And his only private possessions were a loincloth, a water pot, and a walking stick. Although he was worshipped by thousands as a living God, he refused to allow anyone to treat him as a special person, and he always refused to accept anything which could not be shared equally by everyone in his ashram. He shared in the communal work, and for many years he rose at 3 a.m. in order to prepare food for the residents of the ashram. His sense of equality was legendary. When visitors came to see him, it made no difference whether they were VIPs, peasants, or animals. They would all be treated with equal respect and consideration. Welcome. Amba just joined us. His egalitarian concern even extended to the local trees. He discouraged his followers from picking flowers or leaves off them and tried to ensure that whenever fruit was taken from the ashram trees, it was always done in such a way that the tree only suffered a minimum amount of pain. Throughout this period, 1925 to 1950, the center of ashram life was the small hall where Sri Ramana lived, slept, and held court. He spent most of his days sitting in one corner, radiating his silent power and simultaneously fielding questions from the constant flow of visitors who descended on him from every corner of the globe. He rarely committed his ideas to paper, and so the verbal replies given out during this period represent the largest surviving source of his teachings. These verbal teachings flowed authoritatively from his direct knowledge that consciousness was the only existing reality. Consequently, all his explanations and instructions were geared to convincing his followers that this was their true and natural state. Few of the followers were capable of assimilating this truth in its highest and most undiluted form. And so he often adapted his teachings to conform to the limited understanding of the people who came to him for advice. Because of this tendency, it is possible to distinguish many different levels of his teachings. At the highest level that could be expressed in words, he would say that consciousness alone exists. If this was received with skepticism, he would say that awareness of this truth is obscured by the self, limiting ideas of the mind, and that if these ideas were abandoned, then the reality of consciousness would be revealed. Most of his followers found this high-level approach a little too theoretical. They were so immersed in the self, limiting ideas that Sri Ramana was encouraging them to drop, that they felt that the truth about consciousness would only be revealed to them if they underwent a long period of spiritual practice. To satisfy such people, Sri Ramana prescribed an innovative method of self-attention which he called self-inquiry. He recommended this technique so often and so vigorously that it was regarded by many people as the most distinctive motive in his teaching. Even then, many people were not satisfied, and they would continue to ask for advice about other methods or try to engage him in theoretical philosophical discussions, which such people, Sri Ramana would temporarily abandon his absolute standpoint and give appropriate advice on whatever level it was asked. If he appeared on these occasions to accept and endorse many of the misconceptions which his visitors had about themselves, it was only to draw their attention to some aspect of his teachings that he felt would help them to better understand his real views. Inevitably, this policy of modifying his teachings to meet the needs of different people led to many contradictions. He might, for example, tell one person that the individual self is non-existent, and then turn to another person and give a detailed description of how the individual self functions, accumulates karma, and reincarnates. It is possible for an observer to say that such opposing statements may both be true when seen from different standpoints, but the former statement clearly has more validity when it is viewed from the absolute standpoint of Sri Ramana's own experience. So I'm actually going to not read the rest of the introduction because I don't feel it's so relevant, but I wanted to start with the first chapter. I'm just going to check YouTube. Okay. Very good. Part 1, the self. That in which all these worlds seem to exist steadily, that of which all these worlds are a possession, that from which all these worlds rise, that for which all these exist, that by which all these worlds come into existence, and that which is indeed all these, that alone is the existing reality. Let us cherish that self, which is the reality in the heart. Yes, no. Okay, that's it. That kind of sums up the whole teaching. Sums up all we need to know, really. Okay. What else to say? But there's more, so. Chapter 1, the nature of the self. The essence of Sri Ramana's teaching is conveyed in his frequent assertion that there is a single immanent reality, directly experienced by everyone. Is that an echo? I feel like, sorry, 1 second. Oh, let me stay strong. Would you like to say something? Okay, I'm going to mute you, but feel free to unmute if you want to share anything. You're welcome to share anything, but it's very nice to have you.
I'm in office, so I won't be able to speak. Thank you.
It's nice to have your presence here. The essence of Sri Ramana's teachings is conveyed in his frequent assertions that there is a single immanent reality, directly experienced by everyone. which is simultaneously the source, the substance, and the real nature of everything that exists. He gave it a number of different names, each one signifying a different aspect of the same indivisible reality. So, actually, I'm just going to skip a little bit to okay, actually, because it just goes through a list of terms. So I feel like I'm just going to skip to chapter 2. Is that okay? So chapter 2 is self-awareness and self-ignorance. Sri Ramana occasionally indicated that there were 3 classes of spiritual aspirants. The most advanced realize the self as soon as they are told about its real nature. Those in the second class need to reflect on it for some time before self-awareness becomes firmly established. Those in the third category are less fortunate, since they usually need many years of intensive spiritual practice to achieve the goal of self-realization. For the benefit of those in the top 2 categories, Sri Ramana taught that the self alone exists and that it can be directly and consciously experienced merely by ceasing to pay attention to the wrong ideas we have about ourselves. So the question, how can I attain self-realization? Bhagwan says, realization is nothing to be gained afresh. It is already there. All that is necessary is to get rid of the thought, I have not realized. Stillness or peace is realization. There is no moment when the self is not. So long as there is doubt or the feeling of non-realization, skepticism, you would say that awareness of this truth of these by the self. Welcome. I'm just going to read that last part again. There is no moment when the self is not. So long as there is doubt or the feeling of non-realization, the attempt should be made to rid oneself of these thoughts. They are due to the identification of the self with the not-self. When the not-self disappears, the self alone remains. To make room, it is enough that objects be removed. Room is not brought in from elsewhere. Question. Since realization is not possible without the destruction of mental tendencies, how am I to realize that state in which the tendencies are effectively destroyed? And Bhagwan says, you are in that state now. Question. Does it mean that by holding on to the self, the vasanas, mental tendencies, should be destroyed as and when they emerge? Bhagwan. They will themselves be destroyed if you remain as you are. Question. How shall I reach the self? Bhagavan. There is no reaching the self. If self were to be reached, it would mean that the self is not here and now, and that it is yet to be obtained. What is got afresh will also be lost, so it will be impermanent. What is not permanent is not worth striving for. So I say the self is not reached. You are the self. You are already that. The fact is, you are ignorant of your blissful state. Ignorance supervenes and draws a veil over the pure self, which is bliss. Attempts are directed only to remove this veil of ignorance, which is merely wrong knowledge. The wrong knowledge is the false identification of the self with the body and the mind. This false identification must go, and then the self alone remains. Therefore, realization is for everyone. Realization makes no difference between the aspirants. This very doubt, whether you can realize or not, and the notion, I have not realized, are themselves the obstacles. Be free from these obstacles also. Question. How long does it take to reach mukti, liberation? Bhagavan. Mukti is not to be gained in the future. It is there forever, here and now. Question. I agree, but I do not experience it. Bhagavan. The experience is here and now. One cannot deny one's own self. Question. That means existence. That means existence and not happiness. Bhagavan. Existence is the same as happiness, and happiness is the same as being. I'm going to read that again. Existence is the same as happiness, and happiness is the same as being. The word mukti is so provoking. Why should one seek it? One believes that there is bondage, and therefore seeks liberation. But the fact is that there is no bondage. But the fact is that there is no bondage, but only liberation. Why call it by a name and seek it? Questioner. True, but we are ignorant. Bhagavan. Only remove ignorance. That is all there is to be done. All questions relating to mukti are inadmissible. Mukti means release from bondage, which implies the present existence of bondage. There is no bondage, and therefore no mukti either. You still okay? Read for just about, let's see, 10 more minutes or so. Question. Of what nature is the realization of Westerners who relate that they have had flashes of cosmic consciousness? Bhagavan. It came as a flash and disappeared as such. That which has a beginning must also end. Only when the ever-present consciousness is realized will it be permanent. Consciousness is indeed always with us. Everyone knows, I am. No one can deny his own being. The man in deep sleep is not aware. While awake, he seems to be aware. But it is the same person. There is no change in the one who slept and the one who is now awake. In deep sleep, he was not aware of his body, and so there was no body consciousness. In the wakeful state, he is aware of his body, and so there is body consciousness. Therefore, the difference lies in the emergence of body consciousness and not in any change in the real consciousness. The body and body consciousness arise together and sink together. All this amounts to saying that there are no limitations in deep sleep, whereas there are limitations in the waking state. These limitations are the bondage. The feeling, the body is I, is the error. This false sense of I must go. The real I is always there. It is here and now. It never appears anew and disappears again. That which is must also persist forever. That which appears anew will also be lost. Compare sleep and waking. The body appears in one state, but not in the other. Therefore, the body will be lost. The consciousness was pre-existent and will survive the body. There is no one who does not say, I am. The wrong knowledge of I am the body is the cause of all the mischief. This wrong knowledge must go. That is a realization. Realization is not acquisition of anything new, nor is it a new faculty. It is only removal of all camouflage. The ultimate truth is so simple. It is nothing more than being in the pristine state. This is all that need be said. I'll read that last part one more time. The ultimate truth is so simple. It is nothing more than being in the pristine state. That is all that need be said. Maybe we just sit together for 5 minutes or so in silence. Does that feel okay? And actually my battery's going to die soon anyway, so I'll have to stop. But let's just sit together, maybe 5 minutes or so. Unless someone feels they want to say something or share, because that's fine too. Sorry. Okay, so just feel free if anyone wants to share anything. And otherwise, we'll just maybe be together in this space, in this pristine state. Thank you so much for joining. I'm very happy to be reading again, especially this book. Very nice. Well, before we close, would anyone like to share anything?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Jenna says, be as you are. Mm. Be as you are. Thank you so, so much. Mujiji ki jai. Ananta ki, Ananta Jai ki jai. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you, thank you, thank you.